So, welcome everyone. Small crowd and more people joining us online and in person in a few minutes. I wish to really thank those of you who have come here today. My name is Farida Bena. I am the Director of Diplomacy at Every Woman, which is a coalition of over 4,000 activists from 165 countries, so all over the world, working together to end violence against women and girls. We are here today to discuss the main theme of the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, which is access to justice as it relates to our main focus, which is ending violence against women and girls, primarily through international law. We will look also at what happens at the country level, thanks to our distinguished panelists. And I would just like to really just spend a few minutes to emphasize why we are doing this event today. This is a contribution to the theme, the main theme of CSW, but also because we live in a world where violence against women and girls is reaching skyrocketing levels. Just to share a couple of chilling facts, according to the World Health Organization, 840 million women worldwide have experienced violence in their lifetime. And in 2024 alone, according to the UN again, 137 women a day were killed due to gender-related crimes or femicides, mostly at the hand of their intimate partners or family members. That is 50,000 women a year. So this is a trend that is increasing. Unfortunately, it is gaining in speed and scale, and it requires really a coordinated response. Women and girls often pay the highest price in conflict settings. Unfortunately, we're seeing this from Sudan to Gaza to what's happening now in the Gulf region. There's no end to it. And behind these numbers and these conflicts, there are women, there are people with their personal story and with their search for recognition, safety, and justice. We, as Every Woman, as I said, we focus on how to strengthen accountability for this kind of violence, primarily through international law, without neglecting what happens at the country level. And in fact, our research, our advocacy shows that there are two major gaps in women and girls' efforts to access justice. One is, as I said, at the national level and primarily in ensuring that the laws that many states have adopted on violence against women and girls are enforced. So there is an implementation gap, which is serious. But also on the international level, we have identified a major gap in that there is still no comprehensive binding legal framework addressing violence against women and girls. We have several laws and several provisions across different human rights instruments, but they are fragmented, and that is a serious impediment to a coherent, consistent approach to violence against women and girls. So we see these two major gaps as part of the problem, and we think that we strongly believe that the responses should be at multiple levels. At the national level, by strengthening national systems, justice systems, so that they deliver true justice to survivors, and at the international level, um, by ensuring that there is a coordinated approach to this issue so that international law provides a backup if national justice systems fail to deliver to survivors. And so, with that in mind, I would like to introduce the first of two panels, distinguished panels that we have put together for this event. And I would like to take a moment to thank all of the panelists today for their willingness to participate in this discussion. So the event will follow this structure. We will have a first panel looking at what's happening at the country level, what the survivors are saying, the grassroots organizations, the members of the Every Woman Coalition, but also what member states like the Democratic Republic of the Congo are doing to respond to this kind of violence and prevent future violence. And then we'll have a second panel that will be more forward-looking. So we don't want to just look at the problem, at the trends. Unfortunately, I think everybody around this table is familiar with the figures I just mentioned, but also look at the opportunities out there to still strengthen international law and its positive cascaded effects on national laws. And that will be a panel looking specifically at the ongoing international negotiations on the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, where there are increasingly calls for codifying gender oppression, gender persecution, and increasingly we're hearing organizations that will be represented here today about gender apartheid. So without further ado, I would like to start with our first panel and introduce our panelists, starting with Ms. Clarice Falanga Maui, who is a senior researcher from the University of Kinshasa, president of Femme and STEM. She's a champion of women's careers in science and technology. And she's a close collaborator of the special advisor to the president of the DRC, Ms. Chantal Moulin, for violence against women, youth, and human trafficking. Welcome. We will then move on to Dr. Sujata Warrior, who is the Chief Strategic Officer at the Better Women's Justice Project and a close partner of Every Woman. Welcome, Dr. Warrior. And the first panel will then close with Dr. Eleanor Wadinobi, medical doctor, long-standing champion of women's rights, and long-standing also co-founder of Every Woman, the Every Woman Coalition, who will speak for our grassroots organizations. Welcome, Dr. Wadinobi. So let's start with our first panelist, Ms. Clarice Falanga Maui. As I said, you represent the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and we would be really curious to hear from you what the DRC is doing. I think the Democratic Republic of the Congo is one of the very few countries, if not the only one, which has prioritized the fight against women and girls at presidential level. So you really show great leadership in addressing and continuing to give visibility to this issue. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Farida. Let me congratulate you to organize that great event, and especially regarding women and girls and about violence and harassment around the world. So I'm Clarice Falanga. Thank you very much for presenting, very good. And I'm here just to share with you what we are doing in DRC, which is good for women and for girls regarding violence and harassment in the society. So in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, violence and harassment fall into several main categories. often exacerbated by armed conflicts, poverty, and gender inequality. Despite legislative progress, the states remain accountable due to the lack of effective protection of redress. So before going to the field, we make some autopsy, some analysis of different kinds of violence. We have, first of all, the gender-based violence. This is the most widely documented form of the violence affecting women and girls on a massive scale. And inside we have the sexual violence, we have the sexual harassment, and we have the forced or early marriage. We know that in each and every country in Africa, in some culture, they allowed and they force the young girl to go to the marriage because they don't have money and because they don't want to have a name of the family, because they don't want to have some opportunities to help family to be in the kind of level of society. And secondly, we have the physical violence. Inside, we have the mutilation and torture, often linked to abuse by armed group or during communal practice. We know that the DRC, as most of the country in Africa, has a very sensitive security picture. So usually in the armed conflict, they abused in the women and the girl regarding mutilation, regarding some fear, and regarding some, I can say that the bad things. And then we have the murder and summary execution committed during the massacre on civilian or looting. And we have labor exploitation, notably the worst form of child labor in mining or agriculture. In DRC, we have a lot of mineral, and usually women and youth are in the first step of exploitation. And there are a bad practice like some labor exploitation, like some fear, like some mutilation, like some sexual traffics. So this is very sensitive picture regarding women and girls, especially regarding education of youth and girl or women. Third, we have psychological and emotional violence. This is a very sensitive violence. So less visible but ever present, this form of violence aims to undermine the victim's dignity. There we have the threat and intimidation. We know that it's not easy to see if women we can grow up, we can go so up in the society. Usually in some culture, they're doing many things to push down women, to push down or to discourage women and girls, and to do not allow them to go so far and to do their best. We have social stigmatization, and we have violent and psychological harassment, particularly in school, based on disability and poverty. The social picture is one of the pictures who affect women, especially I'm speaking about vitiligo, women who are suffering from vitiligo, women who are suffering from some skin care, some skin products, women who have a disability and cannot walk good, and women who have some difficulty to speak. You know, it's not easy for them to be accepted in the society. And the hand, we have the social and economic violence. Here we're speaking about discrimination in the work, discrimination regarding opportunities, discrimination regarding some financement, and discrimination regarding some recommendation. And we already, after doing some deep analysis, we already mentioned some structural barrier. And then we have insecurity and institutional weakness. We know that impunity persists in the conflict zone because it's difficult to go so far from some places, because usually the security cannot allow people, allow civil society, allow everybody who can do their best to save or to help women and girls who are in the bad picture. And then we have the cost and geographical access. The clinics lack the research for emergency care, and the distance to court slow down proceeding. Usually it's so far from the village, it's so far from some place, we so far from the the real city where we find a lot of cases of violence. And those people have some problem to reach so close and to reach so quickly the courts, to reach so quickly the clinics, and to reach so quickly the place where they can take care of that case. So DRC responsibility is in the progress. We have legal strengthening and redress. There is a lot of program, national programs, where I can tell you about the national gender policy in the national strategy to combat gender-based violence. It starts from 2021 till 2025, and we will have another program from 2026 till 2030. And then we will continue like this. We have one law, the law number 15/002, which incorporates the crime of the genocide, crime against humanity and war crime into the Congolese penal codes. And then we have the law setting out fundamental principles and the protection and the reparation victims. We have also the law we implement the institutional reform establishing the integrated center of multi-sectorial service, especially with the green line. 1, 2, 2, this is a green line which can help anybody, any woman, any girl, whatever they can be, they can use that number to be close or to join some lawyer, to join the government, and they can be take care, or they can be the government can join them and take care of them. And then we have the advocacy and civil society implication. There we see efforts are underway, such as the initiative by the DRC Survivor Network to establish a national reparation fund and strengthen medical and psychological care. Then we have the protective measure regarding legislation, magistrate to guarantee the dignity of the victim, because it's very important. We can care about the victim, but most important is to protect the dignity before, during, and after. How we can care of the victim and to help them regarding their insertion. After the strengthening of and redress legal, we have the medical care. There, the survivor receive free health care regarding HIV prevention and other pregnancy, tetanus, and hepatitis, and other diseases. They receive the free health care and psychological support. This is holistic model is replicated notably through to the Planty Foundation and other non-profit organizations, civil society, and the government. So after this, we have the security and the fight against impunity. We know that everywhere in the country, there is some people who don't want to respect the legal, the law and the legal, I don't know, or so there, the government is doing its best to implement a very strong platform which can control all cases of impunity. I can give an example. 2 months ago, one woman was raped. Yeah. Yeah, one woman have a bad situation when 10 men going to her, and they take the camera to film it. After doing that bad shit, excuse me, the government arrests all those men, puts all those men in the prison, because it was a great lesson to teach all other people who want to do the same thing to stop to do this, to do this. And then we have the step of protection and reintegration mechanism. There, the safe accommodation is being provided for the victim rejected by their communities, their family, and I can say the culture. Because after being a victim, in Africa especially, they don't want to know, and they don't want to hear about you regarding marriage, regarding opportunities, regarding many things. So usually people who are victim, or women are victim, who are victim of that picture, going so far from the family. They don't have any places where they can be integrated. So regarding this point, some NGO like Matumaini and most of NGO help women, help youth to be integrating the society regarding education, regarding work, regarding many things. So regarding statistic of prevalence, speaking about the 100% of the survivor, we already take care of 63% in DRC. So this is a great job we are doing. And regarding legal development access, targeting to 233,000 people, we already take care of 83,096 people. So it's something like the 35 coverage rate. And regarding holistic care, we already give the paper. There, we already take care of something, speaking about the 100 picture, we take care about 57% of women and 43% of men. So I can say that everywhere in each step, the president and the government are present to take care of the people who are victims of all that harassment. So I don't want to be long. So this demonstrates the progress in institutional regulation, structuring and humanitarian response, increase and available service. After talking about that good picture, we have some picture we can maintain us. Yeah, okay, I'm finishing. So there is some persisting challenges. One of challenges is the surge of cases linked to the armed and social-cultural conflicts. Secondly, we have the stigmatization of the survivor, the poor service coverage in virtually inaccessible area, the need to implement and strengthen training for the healthcare and the process impunities. Okay, and then we recommend one thing regarding everything we are doing. DRC is working on the implementation of prior warning mechanisms with the technological component that enable to the community to anticipate, to manage information, and taking into account prevention, efficient response, and the remediation of the case before harm occurs. In view of this preventive and life-saving prospect, we are calling for collaboration regarding with every woman and other partners to technical support and funding for developing countries, including the DRC. Aware the negative impacts to this atrocity, the President of the Republic of the Congo, Sir Felix Antoine Tshisekedi, who are called the champion of the positive masculinities, through his own department are working hard to stop all that case. And according to the chapter of the United Nations International Humanitarian Law and the principle of human dignity, the Democratic Republic of the Congo reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to fully support the drafting of the International Convention on the Prevention and the Punishment of Crime against Humanity, a process that has dragged on for too long, but despite the clear necessity of emergency matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Falangamawi. I mean, this was a very comprehensive overview of what the Democratic Republic of the Congo is doing. And I think what I took away from your intervention is 2 points, really. The first one is this holistic approach to violence against women and girls. I mean, intervening on a legal level, prosecuting perpetrators, but also taking care of the survivor on a physical, medical, psychological level, ensuring, as you said, protecting the dignity of the person, of the survivor, which often is deprioritized compared to other kinds of intervention. So that is encouraging. We'll come back to you with questions and answers later on, but thank you. This was really on the one hand, it really gives us pause to reflect on what's happening, and at the same time, it's an example that other countries, other member states can follow. Moving on to our next panelist, Dr. Sujata Warrior, Chief Strategy Officer at the Battered Women's Justice Project. Dr. Warrior has an incredible background, and has received many awards, has served in, just to mention a few, the Awake Award for South Asian Women's Advocacy, the Indian Chamber of Commerce Women Achievers Award, the New York 30 Women Leaders Award. Wow. So really amazing. You serve on several boards, including the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, and you were appointed by the U.S. Attorney General to serve in the Office of Violence Against Women Advisory Board at the Department of Justice. So you have decades of experience working on this issue, and we're really keen to hear your views on really what works in addressing this huge issue from all angles, and what lessons can we learn from your experience and expertise.
Thank you, Dr. Bena, and thank you to my fellow panelists. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for organizing this. This is very important, the whole area of access to justice itself. So in talking about, I also want to say that I served on the advisory board under the Obama administration, just to make very clear that is not because I would have checked myself into the nearest mental hospital. So, but it was a while back. I should really clarify that. So anyway, so having worked both in the US and in other parts of the world, I think we have made great strides in the 40 plus years that I have sort of worked to change the way systems, not just legal systems, but healthcare and other systems respond to the needs of survivors. And I always come from the needs of survivors and victim advocacy, and really sort of forcing systems to operate differently when it comes to responding to survivors. And so I do think in the US, the change that came about from the Violence Against Women Act of 1994, however many years ago that is now, it came about because attorneys, advocates, survivors work together. Nothing changes if we all operate in our silos. It's nice to operate in your silos because you don't have to deal with the crap that's outside. However, the problem is that it doesn't really work for survivors, because you really need to put survivors front and center. And they have to drive the process, and that process was driven, of course, it's a legal document, and it really did pass with bipartisan support. And the other piece of any implementation of laws, I think we always look for, in many developing nations, like, let's have a law. It's fine, you can have a law. But if the law isn't implemented, there's nothing. And in order to implement it, you have to put your money where your mouth is. Because that's often what happens, that there's a law, but there's no money behind it. And then when you're trying to get either the police to operate in a certain way, or prosecutors or the judicial officers, why do they care? They don't care. And so, over the years, we've begun to see a lot of problems. I mean, gender bias, patriarchy, that is the driving force of misogyny, is everywhere. And you have to kind of deal with it all the time. Because of how it operates, it actually makes victims less credible. They are not credible when they show up in court. And I had a judge tell me, I can look at somebody and tell you if they're credible or not. I was like, now that is something I would like to learn, because in the 50 plus years of, I can't tell. Right, but clearly that's where, because gender bias is the fundamental bias we all learn. Everything else comes later, right? So it is something we have to tackle because of how that impacts survivors, because even if access is granted, particularly in family court, where you see the major areas is around custody, because the fundamental thing is patriarchal, therefore you connect the child to the father, right? And that is there in almost all the countries, and it always drives who gets custody and who doesn't get custody. And the notion of, sort of coercive control, what that means, so that when you're looking at international law, it's a definition of coercive control that has to be worked out. Because most people don't understand it. People are looking at incident-based sort of physical violence. So physical violence is only the one little piece of it. It's the rest of it that actually we don't have a grasp on how to use it in court, because what gets used in court can be also used by the other side. That's the other part of it, because it is a double-edged sword. And for me, who I've always worked with those who are marginalized, right? It is in this country, it would be African Americans, everybody from Latin America, Asian Pacific Islander, and also immigrant women. We've made lots of strides in this country to make special accommodations for immigrant women, because their issues are very contextual, and there were specific sort of provisions given to them. But as you all know, in the last year, particularly with immigration customs, ICE and its presence definitely in Minnesota and Minneapolis, and what has happened as a result to survivors, both who are immigrants, but also to asylees and refugees, that all of what we have shaped to make it very clear these are special categories, you have to understand where they're coming from, has all been undermined. Everything has been undermined. And sometimes when I reflect back, days that I'm pessimistic. Today I'm not, because I'm here with all of you, and there's a lot of support, right? But days that I'm actually pessimistic is like, where are we going with all this, right? I mean, what's going to happen to all the sort of advantages and strides that we had actually made? So when we look at immigrant women, there are also issues of transnational importance that we have to consider, because violence against women and girls really doesn't look at national borders. It doesn't. It's a transnational issue, right? It crosses boundaries. So when you are migrating, the ways in which immigrant men operate, like taking the survivors, taking them back to the country of origin, leaving there, bringing their kids back. There are lots of issues where these national laws really get in the way, particularly around kids, particularly around financial considerations. If there's money involved, you can rest assured that money is hidden. They don't have access to money, property. Those are all pieces that then you have to look at when it comes to domestic violence. Now, when you're looking at sexual violence, and particularly sexual violence in marginalized communities, those cases don't even make it to court. They kind of get stopped with law enforcement because they are generally not believed. It's the whole credibility issue. I worked with a Native community up in Duluth, Minnesota. We had done this whole survivors asking them, and they said, look, we complain to the police, we go there, there's tons of evidence, but we also know from the very beginning that nothing is going to happen. And even though we know that, and nothing actually happens, all we wanted was the police to come and tell us nothing is going to move forward and why that is. So that when survivors, what it teaches us is when survivors are sharing their narratives, which is important, that there's also should be a feedback mechanism where even if the news is bad, we share that with them. They know it's going to be bad. It's not like they don't know that. Particularly if you're marginalized, because you're not just marginalized, you're a woman, right? You're marginalized on all these access, and you're not going to get a lot of things anyway. So you're not expecting it. What little you get, it's like amazing. So also when you're thinking about the legal systems, the length of time a case takes By the time you get to it, I would not remember what happened to me. And the demand that you provide a linear narrative when your life doesn't work in a linear fashion, right? That gets in the way of assessing credibility. So then you look at cases, you look at like India, for example, where I've done a lot of work, particularly with trafficking. They have specialty courts. It's not the regular court you go to, it's a very different court. The judges are trained, everybody who's in that court system, they're trained. Medical folks are trained, what you have to look at, what support you need, and those cases are literally done in 6 months or less. Because that's the critical piece, like the longer you take, the less all of that matters in the legal system. And it's not, so when you were talking about holistic, it's really how the legal system also intersects with the medical system. It intersects with the social service system, and how all things have to fall into place, right? And I think at a time when there are severe cutbacks to the social safety net, right, it becomes harder and harder to figure out what do you do with survivors. So then I am taken back 40 plus years when we started the work. There's nothing there. There was no shelters, no safety nets, but we figured it out. We figured it out with the survivors. What do you do? How do you get your community to support the person? They belong in community, like when you were saying, they're ostracized. Like, what? I will also tell you, I work on homicide cases, right? Domestic violence homicide cases. When a man kills, believe me, the entire community is out there raising money for, his defense. The flip happens, they're like, okay, let's lynch her. She doesn't deserve to be here. And you're like, everybody, no matter what, is entitled to a defense, right? Whatever it is, but you begin to see how it actually operates. So it's really coming back to my starting point. It's the way gender bias shows up in all of these places, right? And for all the hard work survivors, advocates did to change society's response to how we see and understand survivors, we have made a lot of, none of this would be in place if survivors and advocates didn't work so hard. But I think the part of the equation that's missing and that we didn't account for is the backlash. So when we are designing systems, we always have to account for the fact that nobody gives power. Power has to be taken. And when you're taking that power, there's always ways in which people are going to figure out the backlash. You already see that, right? I've been reading I usually have something you need to have something. You can't read that stuff without it, because whatever that thing is that takes you to a higher plane of sort of comprehension. You read the Epstein files. It's like the hatred of women is really what shows up. You see really wealthy, mediocre people making decisions on the lives of survivors. And then you think, what did we not account for? So in our conversation, what we should always think about is, yes, we are pushing these things, but let's think about what the backlash is going to be and prepare for that. That is what we didn't do very well. And now we are facing the consequences of some of that. So I think I'll stop. Thank you.
One powerful intervention after the other. I feel so honored to be in this discussion. Thank you so much. And you mentioned some very important issues to reflect on. Number one, no funding undermines implementation, even of the best laws, pure and simple. So the funding or lack of thereof is having a major impact on not just development, humanitarian aid, specifically, this cross-cutting issue of gender-based violence. Gender bias is everywhere. We see it even in how survivors are treated in court, their credibility versus how male survivors would be treated. And then the issue of time. how important it is to intervene quickly and holistically, because what these survivors experience, it does not follow necessarily a linear sequence, and may change over time, or the memory of it may change over time. So thank you for that.
Can I add something? When you said money, I suddenly remembered something I want to say. The big issue now, which we have no answers to actually, is tech facilitated GBV. The tech work, that whole area, I mean, I stay away from it as much as possible, but that is deadly from what I see. And all that we've designed doesn't work. I can just tell you that right now. So where money is with all those tech companies. I think now we have to start holding them accountable, getting money to pay for to work with survivors. I wanted to say
and
that.
actually, every woman, I will tell more about this later, but technology facilitated or digital violence is one of our priorities. Thank you so much. And now to close panel one on survivor voices. What do we hear from them? I'm very honored to introduce Dr. Eleanor Wadinobi. She's a medical doctor, and again, an impressive background. She served as the Africa Regional Representative to the UN NGO Executive Committee, National President of the Medical Women's Association of Nigeria. You serve on the board of several organizations, including Women First and the Africa Agenda. You're an advisor to the Global Fund for Women, recipient of the Irene Igodaro Prize. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. You're also a co-founder and longstanding member of the Every Woman Coalition. And one thing I wanted to say, of course, we would have invited Dr. Wadinobi to join us anyway. But she has very kindly accepted to speak for our grassroots advocacy organizations, because unfortunately, all the organizations we reached out to could not join us today in person due to security issues or visa concerns or, visa restrictions. So, the impact of what's happening around the world can be felt right at this table. And I'm so grateful that you can speak for some of our grassroots members, not on their behalf, but please help us understand what you're hearing from survivors right now and how we can turn all this frustration, fear, and just, these human rights violations into possibly the motivation that we need to look for solutions and identify solutions.
Thank you so very much, Farida, and to every woman for having this panel. And thank you to the erudite speakers who, spoke so eloquently before me. First, a disclaimer: who am I to speak for, coalition members and survivors? But I was in a meeting yesterday and I was asked a question about those who can't be here. Those who also can't even be online. And I said, I went to a meeting once and it was such a powerful picture that a chair was set aside representing those who couldn't be here, either because, they have been so violated that they cannot move, or they don't have visas, or for whatever reason. So today, we have a chair with a red piece of cloth, just representing, let's think of those who couldn't be in this room and at this table today, unlike us who are so privileged to be here. I would like to use the practical experience of running a grassroots organization, which brought me to the Every Woman organization in the first place, called the Widows Development Organization, working for widows who have suffered harmful traditional practices, which I won't go into in detail, but on account of losing their husbands and already being in positions of vulnerability, having an additional layer of violence upon them, and in some cases, conflict widows. Widows are not a monolith, or they're not homogeneous. So whilst a lot of people might think they're older women, in some cases they are child widows. In some cases, they are wives of the disappeared, those who have no closure. And as the Widows Development Organization, a very grassroots organization, and as you can see from our banner for every woman, it says, from grassroots power to global accountability. That is what every woman is about. Recognizing the power that lies within our grassroots. And we harnessed our power. How? Data. Data is the new gold. We went into the highways and byways to look at where these harmful practices were prevalent. Where exactly were women being forced to drink the water in which their husbands had been bathed? Where exactly were women being dispossessed of their properties? What was the extent by way of numbers? How many of them were the walking wounded? My sister here from DRC spoke of ostracization. Yes, stigma, silence, shame for those who had been sexually violated, especially in conflict. And where we have prevalent early marriage, calling violence the name it should be called. A young girl who is married at 9, for goodness sake, is being raped by her husband. So it's the grassroots that have the courage to document and name and shame, even within the institution of marriage, where some countries' constitutions will blatantly say that a woman is one who has breasts and can be married. How can a 9-year-old who has what we call in medicine precocious puberty be called a woman? When the Child's Rights Act says you have to be 18. The power in the grassroots, we use that for advocacy. Armed with the data, we then moved to the next level. We went to our parliament and we advocated with our parliamentarians to say there must be a law outlawing all these harmful practices. After 6 years of working hard, the law came into being. But guess what? Because the parliament had all men, they slipped into the law the word widower. But we were fine with that because widows were protected. And then came the practical vanguard. We call them the widow vanguard. Thank you, Ms. Sujata, for talking about the holistic and also the holistic. So the vanguard had religious leaders, traditional leaders, those who could provide legal aid, those who could provide medical. So the vanguard stood literally as a vanguard for each widow that had been violated, so that her community could see that she did not stand alone, but that she had a vanguard around her. But the challenges are there. Justice denied is justice delayed. And the justice system taking forever, the justice system costing an arm and a leg, perpetrators going unpunished. And you find a situation where a mother would tell her daughter who has been violated, shh, we want to make sure we can get you a husband. So let no person in the community know that you were sexually violated. So how do you then support a family who has decided of their own volition to withdraw a case in court? And then there are issues around inheritance. The woman will farm the land, but the land does not belong to her. So it's difficult in 1 minute to speak of work that has gone on for 35 years. But suffice it to say, it took 6 years to bring about a state law. It took 14 years to bring about a national law. We have been able to document true life testimonies, the kind of testimonies a sister who would have sat on this chair would have told herself. Let us use the opportunity of a global binding norm to ensure that when we're speaking of justice, that we are not looking for a situation, for example, where female genital mutilation is outlawed in one geography and people now are able to move to another geography to perpetrate violence. That's why we need the global binding norm, like the Every Woman is proposing, to protect every woman and girl with any type of vulnerability. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your very eloquent intervention and your focus again on the need for a holistic approach. We heard, these problems of stigma, of silence, of shame that survivors feel when they experience violence, all forms of violence. But we also heard about possible solutions, calling violence for what it is. So giving it a voice, recognizing violence when we see it, and also using data to really bring the evidence. So thank you very much. This was very much needed. We are moving a little bit behind schedule. So what I propose is that for this panel, we start thinking about a question that hopefully you will want to reply to towards the end of the event, which is, obviously the problem is complex, access to justice for survivors of violence. What would be your top recommendation to improve access to justice at the national level primarily, and also, as we've just heard from Dr. Wadinobi, at the international level? So I'll let you think about it. I know that I'm asking you to oversimplify, but we do need to move forward and move ahead. So with that, we'll close panel 1 and we'll move to panel 2. And I would like to invite Wendy, Isaac to join me here. The other 2 panelists will be joining us online. In the meantime, please feel free to grab a lunch box. We do have some food and there's drinks in the back. While we get started with the second panel, which is more forward-looking. So as grim as the current situation is, there is still a lot of a lot that can be done both at the national and the international level to improve access to justice for survivors of violence, female survivors, women, all women and girls. We do consider, women and girls in all their diversity. And one forward-looking sort of a scenario and a great opportunity that we see is the negotiation process that is ongoing for a Crimes Against Humanity treaty here in New York. So negotiations started a few weeks ago, and several civil society organizations have been following this very closely, including Every Woman. So our first speaker is the policy advisor from the End Gender Apartheid Coalition, Ms. Metra Meran, who is joining us online. I think it's fairly late where she is, so I would like to thank her for agreeing to speak with us. Just looking at my colleague. Yes, hi Metra. Thank you very much for joining us. Metra is a human rights activist with over a decade of experience in international development, women, peace and security, gender equality. She now lives in exile and she advocates for the recognition of the Taliban's systematic oppression of women as gender apartheid under international law. So, Metra, over to you. Please tell us what is the End Gender Apartheid Coalition that you work with doing to turn this objective into reality. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there in person. I was in New York last week, but I had to leave back to DC. Why gender apartheid and why now? So as you know, since August 2021, Taliban took power in Afghanistan, and they have dehumanized women and girls and have issued laws and have established a system that totally deny rights of women, girls in our LGBTQI plus community. Since their takeover, they have issued 200 decrees, out of which 500 decrees, out of which over 235 of them directly target women and girls in LGBTQI plus community. Women and girls in Afghanistan cannot go to school, cannot go to work. They don't have freedom of movement, freedom of speech, or even as we are observing holy month of Ramadan, and we are at the final days. Because faces and voices of women are criminalized, they cannot practice their faith and religion. There is this bizarre and insane law that says a woman cannot recite Quran loudly, so other women cannot hear it. There are guards in some parts of Kabul, mainly the news I heard from Kandahar and Herat, where they do not allow women to enter mosque. So that, and then in addition, on January, we woke up to the Taliban's penal code, that some of these laws they have introduced before is now extended to children too. And there is no justice in their jurisdiction system. They're totally in denial of our LGBTQI plus community, do not mention it even publicly. There is one article that address it as behavioral sodomy, and then says the elder of the community or the clerk or the clergy can give him or her death penalty if it's for the sake of the good of the community. And then there are, and the penal code also says if a woman is beaten by the husband, and if the bone is not broken and a bruise is not open enough to bleed, it is not criminalized. So I'm saying few examples from the penal code to show the depth of the depth of the atrocities happening. But this is not the first time we are experiencing it. Women of Afghanistan went through the same thing between 1996 and 2001, asked for the codification and criminalization of gender apartheid, but it didn't happen. So one thing that the moment Taliban took power, even before, during the negotiations, women of Afghanistan started using the term gender apartheid. And we wonder if it was criminalized then, what would have happened, so do we have to, or did we have to go through it again? That's why the Gender Apartheid campaign came out, and it's an echo of the call from the women of Afghanistan, of course, in solidarity with their partners globally. And then we have proposed a definition, a provision to the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty that it be codified. But I think for women of Afghanistan, in Gender Apartheid campaign is more than the codification of it. We are also seeing the timeline in the process, how it has become a rallying and mobilization force for us, not only to create more cohesion for our work internally and for our mobilization, but also it has become a pathway for us to look up to South Africa and as their legacy and learn from them, to look at the Palestine and learn from their struggle. In other contexts that apartheid has happened, how the systematic and institutionalized system of oppression being perpetrated by the Taliban and other groups in other contexts to maintain the domination of men and the domination of a state over over the women. The other thing, I'm also managing Afghanistan Justice Archive, where I monitor and document the Taliban decrees, and we analyze it against international law. The other key aspect, in addition to animating context, that we are seeing how Taliban or their governance system is based on this oppression. But also the intention they're pursuing it by that system, and that's the sustainability of the Taliban's regime. It's not both pragmatically, technically, and also ideologically. It is essential and existential for the regime. That's why, for example, voices and faces of women were criminalized, but when month of Ramadan came, they even issued a new law criminalizing recitation of Quran by the women. So we also see how anything that they see enable women to mobilize or enable any group to question the authority of the regime, they introduce a new law and they put a new place to enforce it. And I think that resonance that we see, especially on the issue of maintenance of domination, that is we see in other contexts. And I have traveled to South Africa 3 times. Different groups of women have been traveling. We are learning from them, but also in communication with our sisters in Palestine. In addition to, I think, as I said before, to the technicality of it, it has become a very strong mobilization force for us to keep cohesion and unity within us as a movement, but also stand in solidarity and learn from and rely on the other movements in other contexts, and through that create that global solidarity we need for women and girls in Afghanistan. And I briefly want to also go and say that Crimes Against Humanity Treaty has given us a golden opportunity, I want to call it, considering how long international law usually takes. So we have now a timeline in front of us. And my effort personally is how we can use the movement to become as global as it needs to push all the states and countries to support codification of gender apartheid within the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. We have engaged women of Afghanistan, of course, our movement in general, with almost all the states. So far, 12 countries have supported, particularly codification of gender apartheid within the crimes against humanity. We have over 20 countries who have called what's happening in Afghanistan gender apartheid, but I haven't heard explicitly on or in written codification that we are pushing for that. But as we are in the week of CSW, we also had UN officials, including Secretary General, that put forward and suggested codification of gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty in his report for CSW, which we welcomed it. The momentum is there, the movement is there. What we need more is, of course, more collaboration and coordination with you guys and solidarity of women globally to stand with women of Afghanistan. To conclude my remarks, I just want to say I personally am an activist. I'm relying so much technically on legal expertise of my sisters from Afghanistan and our international allies. I'm also learning from other contexts and while respecting legacy of, for example, South Africa and Palestine, I'm also seeing how far they have become in their struggle and what I can learn to take this fight forward. But also the other thing is I don't want to say this is our fight because what I was mad in New York and most of the side events I attended, and I was like, why CSW is not on rage about Afghanistan? And the reason is, I think the atrocities Taliban are perpetrating against women and girls in Afghanistan have passed any threshold of humanity or dignity we know of. If it's gender persecution, if it's apartheid, if it's slavery, if it's anything that we know that it's violation of human dignity, and we came together as global community to make it law, to prevent it and punish it. Taliban are legalizing it and normalizing it, including slavery and apartheid. So this is not our fight only. I think what's happening there is it should shake conscience of humanity, and we should fight together for it. So as much as I see it my fight and my sister's fight, I think I want to call on everyone to say that it is a global fight. That if it was not, we wouldn't have gotten together to prevent and criminalize apartheid or slavery. And Taliban, their penal code legalize all of it and normalize it. And we need you to stand together. And my last remark is I think we are, as women, seeing global regression against women and girls and LGBTQI community in our or gender in general. Maybe gender apartheid, as it needs a global action against it, can also serve as a strong global force that we as women in global community get together and stand against this regression we are seeing globally. So that's why that would be my call, that Crimes Against Humanity Treaty in general, making it gender competent and more progressive, can be our joint call to say to this regression we are seeing against gender. I think Wendy will talk more and better about it. But in January, I was in New York for the preparatory committee, and it was.
Sorry, Petra. Sorry, we need to close.
Okay, no, thank you. But yeah,
Thank you
but
so much.
how
Thank
much
you.
like backlash we are seeing from different
Yes.
countries about gender. So we should do this fight together. Thank you.
Thank you. Very strong, compelling case for supporting this call for gender apartheid and the codification in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, not just for the women and girls in Afghanistan, but for women and girls everywhere. And we will get back to this point about universalizing this call for gender apartheid. So thank you for really identifying the similarities across countries and crisis and the danger of normalizing what's happening in Afghanistan. Our next speaker is Wendy Isaac, Senior Legal Fellow at Madre. Thank you so much for joining us. Wendy is a South African feminist lawyer with more than 2 decades of experience in policy and advocacy across Southern and West Africa, the African human rights system, the UN. You've held several roles at Human Rights Watch, UN Women, the Office of the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict. You've also supported the CEDA committee, drafted General Recommendation number 30, and you've worked with many South African public interest and women's rights organizations. So very honored to have you today. And I hope you can help us better understand also some of the definitions. I mean, we don't want to get into a lengthy discussion on definitions, but they do matter when we negotiate new treaties at multilateral level. If you could just help us understand what is the difference? Why don't we just talk about gender oppression or systematic discrimination? Why do we need to use the term apartheid, gender apartheid? I know it's a simple question or silly question, but we do need to get the basics right.
Thank you, Farida, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to be frank and honest at the outset that I do not think we should be saying gender apartheid.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's start off with that. Let me complicate life a little bit. And I want to thank Mitra for speaking ahead of me, because it's important that we find platforms where the views for calling for the crime of gender apartheid are put on the table, and the views calling for an alternative definition are put on the table at the same time, so we can be in dialogue with each other. I have 4 versions of this presentation. So, and I don't have a lot of time, so I'm sure you'll be compelled to cut me off, but I'm going to try and say as much as I possibly can to give you a clear picture of what we have been doing as Madre in South Africa and in the Africa region, and with partners from Palestine and Afghanistan. So, I am a South African human rights lawyer. I am old enough to have been born and raised. I was born in the early 70s, born and raised under the brutal system of apartheid in my own country. I lived through it. I lived through the state of emergency. I lived through the end of the apartheid system. So I'm not talking about this topic from an academic perspective as a Black South African woman. This is real life experience, right? That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I'll say as an introduction is that I've had the privilege and honor to travel to Palestine over 11 years, 13 times, to do human rights work, documentation, and research on the impact of the Israeli occupation, illegal occupation now according to the ICJ, and apartheid policies in the occupied territory, and including the state of Israel itself. So I'm going to speak on those 2 country perspectives and in relation to how the Africa region and African states are approaching this topic. Now, I know that the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, which is now starting to move since the January PrepCon, started several years ago, maybe 8 years ago now. International conversations were happening in New York, they were happening in Geneva, they were happening in The Hague, but particularly in New York among international NGOs about the CAH Treaty. Conversations were happening about the codification of gender apartheid for several years before the conversations were brought to Global South activists. In South Africa, where I live, I personally only heard about the calls for, and maybe I'm just not informed or uneducated, but I only personally heard about it about 2 years ago. And at a point where they were saying, well, there needs to be codification of the crime of gender apartheid, and that's great. And I've had the opportunity to hear and learn from colleagues that I work with at Madre and from Afghan colleagues, Mitra herself included, about the situation in Afghanistan, the details of the oppression of women in Afghanistan, and the similarities with the oppression of women in the South African and Namibian context are quite stark. So that's the starting point. But what we needed to do as Madre in introducing this conversation in South Africa was to say, let's roll back. Before we look at a specific proposal for the codification of a new crime called gender apartheid, let's look at what happened to Black women in South Africa and Namibia. People routinely forget Namibia. Namibia had its own system of apartheid, introduced by the same regime. How often do we talk to Namibian women, for instance? How often have campaigns that have been mobilized around the codification of gender apartheid spend time, resources, and energy in talking to Black women across the South African context to get a sense of what happened to gender, or what was the conversation around gender during the apartheid regime, in the resolution of the apartheid system, in your transitional justice mechanism, and who, if anyone, has anyone been held accountable for the crime of apartheid anyway? And I will assure you, nobody has. Not for racial apartheid or gender apartheid. Well, it's not racial apartheid because apartheid is racial. But for the crime of apartheid, nobody's been held accountable. So the starting point needed to be for Madre, and this is what we've been doing for a year and a half or a little bit more than that, is to say, let's roll back. Before we look at gender, because we have to look at gender. And when we look at gender, we have to look at what this term means. How do you not exclude LGBT people? How do you include women in all their diversity, right? Or everyone. But we needed to roll back to say, there is an existing convention of the crime of apartheid, a 1973 convention that came into force in 1976. This convention was negotiated, mobilized, member states mobilized, primarily Global South member states mobilized during the height of the apartheid system in South Africa. That convention was adopted and came into force in 1976. Now, when we think about how member states are reacting to the proposals that are on the table around the apartheid provision, gender apartheid, however you want to formulate it, you take a look and see who ratified the apartheid convention when the apartheid system was in force in South Africa, and who's coming behind a crime of gender apartheid. The similarities will shock you. Those states that did not ratify, and I'm talking about European states and the US, that did not ratify the Apartheid Convention and have not ratified it till today, are getting behind the crime of gender apartheid. So when we think about solidarity work and activism and how we mobilize as feminists, how do we say, let's do gender but do race as well? Because if you're only going to do gender, you're leaving out an entire population in the Africa region. Let me quickly roll back. I don't know how much time I have, maybe a minute.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, wow. All right, let me quickly say two things then. One thing is, there's the Apartheid Convention, which contains a definition of apartheid, okay? There is and this is decades before the Rome Statute. When people start talking about the provision of apartheid in the CAH Treaty, they only go back as far as the Rome Statute. That's not where it started. There's also the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So, sure, that's the branch of international human rights law. But that's also important because you have to look at the work of the third committee. What have they said about apartheid? Before we start making proposals that maybe will be disjointed. So let me zone in on what we've been doing as Madri. We've been quite deliberate in talking to as many activists, as many people who are working on the front lines of the crime of apartheid in South Africa, in Namibia, and then particularly in Palestine. So as South Africans and Namibians, our apartheid is historical in terms of its legal provisions. We're dealing with the legacies of it. But the Palestinian women and girls are sitting with the reality of Israeli apartheid policies and practices for 70 years. So when we talk about gender and the gender dimensions of the apartheid crime, how closely are we looking at how apartheid manifests in Palestinian communities in the West Bank, in annexed East Jerusalem, inside the state of Israel? Because again, as a feminist lawyer, you have to move away from the framing of the UN system. You're not only looking at occupied Palestinian territory, you're looking at the entire territory. Now, I've been to cities inside Israel. I've been to communities. I need to cut off. Allow me to say one last thing. If you are talking about women and girls and access to justice and apartheid, let's please have a real and proper conversation about how to not erase the experiences of Black women and the experiences of Palestinian women.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
really you opened our eyes to the multiple dimensions of apartheid. So instead of just going for one specific gender dimension, we should look at how at the intersectionality in a way of race, gender, and so many other factors. So thank you. We're really running behind schedule. We have one more panelist, and I'm just wanting to let you know we may run over 5 minutes. I hope that's okay. They're not gonna kick us out of the room until 3:15. So I hope you will want to join us. This is, I don't want to sound immodest, but it is a very, very interesting conversation and discussion. So we will move on to our last but not least panelist, the wonderful Judge Najla Ayubi, international criminal law scholar. Judge Najla is an Afghan lawyer, a former judge, and actually she was the first female judge from the Parwan province in Afghanistan and contributed to drafting Afghanistan's 2004 constitution. Following the Taliban's return to power in 2021, she chose to go into exile in the US, but she continues her advocacy as shown today as well. Judge Najla is also a member of the Every Woman Coalition treaty. And if you could help us, Judge Najla, really understand and go deeper into why we need to universalize this call for codifying apartheid, as we've just heard from Wendy, into the new Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here also. I really learned a lot from my colleagues who spoke before me. I think a couple of things I know that my time is very short because I'm the last one. And so,
but not least.
but a couple of things I wanted to mention that this is very important. First, addressing the normative gap that we all talked about, codifying gender persecution, and also ensuring enforceability and also participation in incorporating civil society participation in the process of developing the Crime Against Humanity Treaty can create a robust, inclusive, and also accountable international framework that will strengthen the current justice, particularly the women and girls who have been faced, they will be benefit from. So my point is basically, I would love to just make sure that how the Crime Against Humanity Treaty will add to the current legal frameworks, and I will definitely talk about what you were focusing, Farida, that the current, particularly I'm going to talk about the CEDAW and also Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, while the CEDAW is a primary global a treaty addressing discrimination against women, codifying gender apartheid in the international criminal law, such as Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, would significantly strengthen the protection in several key ways. One, human rights obligations to criminal accountability. CEDAW is a human rights treaty or a human rights a framework defining the human rights issues, meaning it obligates states to eliminate discrimination against women through legislation, policy reform, reporting mechanisms. However, it does not criminalize systematic oppressions or systematic gender oppression. That's the important piece. Recognizing gender apartheid as a crime against humanity would establish individual criminal responsibility to leaders and officials who enforce systemic gender oppression or domination, allowing international or domestic persecutions of perpetrators. Move the issues from policy violation to the international crime. So the second point is that a stronger enforcement mechanism will be in place. CEDAW relies on reporting, on monitoring by the Committee of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, recommendations, and also diplomatic pressure. these mechanisms essential, but they are not mandatory. So by contrast, criminal law mechanisms such as those under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court will bring the criminal investigation, arrest warrants, and also trials and sentencing. So these are the benefit that we will get by codifying gender apartheid would be therefore creating a real enforcement tools for at the international level, but also at the domestic level. Recognition of systemic gender oppression is also another piece that we have to focus on. Gender, CEDAW is addressing discrimination, but gender apartheid actually captures the threshold, as Mitra mentioned, the threshold of abuse as systems of institutionalization or institutionalizing domination and segregation based on gender. So this concept recognizes situation where women and girls systematically excluded from work, from public life. I have been experienced this situation. Today I was a judge and sitting in the court. The next day I was vanished from my public life. So I was pushed home. So that's also something that we have to make sure that we are looking into. Legal system institutionalized male dominance, which is also, it's one of the examples in Iran and Afghanistan. The state enforces comprehensive gender segregation that we see specifically in Afghanistan. So generally, there is also complementarity between the laws, the human rights, and also the criminal law. The CEDAW is focusing on prevention, reform, monitoring, and equal obligations. But crimes against humanity will bring accountability to severe systemic violations. So basically that how we can bring the prevention, these two will bring the full spectrum response to prevention and also punishment. So now universalizing the gender apartheid ensures that the concept is not limited to one country. As we all know that this is not only Afghan women or Iranian women or Palestinian women are facing, but this can be general in global. Like for example, the crimes of apartheid was historically associated with South Africa. But however, international law defines it as a crimes that can occur anywhere. So apartheid can occur anywhere in the world, not only specifically in South Africa. So similarly, gender apartheid should apply wherever a system of gender-based discrimination or gender-based domination exists. Avoiding the country-specific trap, I agree with most of my friends that we shouldn't just focus on if gender apartheid is framed only in relation to Afghanistan or Iran, it risks being as a political or regional issues, weakening the legal universality of it, and also reducing the willingness of a state to adopt the concept in the treaties. So recognize basically a universal definition ensures the law targets the system of operation, not a specific government or regime. So recognizing global patterns of systemic gender oppression is also another piece that we have to look into. Although Afghanistan is currently really in a bad shape, and women and girls are basically a good example was given by Ms. Mitra. But at the same time, element of the institutionalized gender domination can appear in many other contexts. I know that my time is very limited. 2 more points and I will stop. Legal system restricted.
Only have 30 seconds, Judge Angela.
30
Sorry.
seconds. Okay, then I will just pass on the other points. In short, CEDAW addresses discrimination, but it lacks criminal enforcement. And also codifying gender apartheid as a crime against humanity adds accountability in enforcement, which we really need those. Universalizing the concept ensures the law protects women everywhere rather than being tied to a single country or a single historic case or a region. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judge Nash. For being so concise and clear. I particularly appreciated your highlighting the complementarities between criminal law and human rights law. So we have the CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We also have this opportunity with the crimes against humanity. I know that we're over time, and so I will ask you an impossible question. To summarize in one sentence, possibly, ideally of no more than 10 words, your top recommendation for improving access to justice for survivors of gender-based violence. What can we do? How can we use the law to do this? Starting with 10 words. I know it's impossible, but
To me, it's any law has to centralize survivors. And if we don't do that, and you know, I think Wendy really spoke eloquently to that. It's really those diverse oppositional voices you have to get into place because survivors are different and they have different needs. Yeah.
thank you. So
Yeah.
diverse voices of survivors. Great. Over to you.
Yeah, actually, it's time for our country and our president and our civil society to work to protect all women regarding all that violence, harassment, and to respect the law. There is a lot of law, but difficult to respect it in some countries, especially in Africa.
You mean enforcement?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, law enforcement. Thank you so much. Over to Dr. Eleanor.
I would say that laws are not limited by geographical boundaries. And unless and until we have a global binding norm to address all forms of violence against women and girls of all vulnerabilities, then we would not have hit the nail on the head.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Over to Metra, if she's still online. Metra, your 10-word recommendation for improving access to justice for survivors.
I think it's just that it's coming. I think I wanted to conclude with that initially is how we can stand together in solidarity to go against the global gender backlash. That it's gonna take hold of all of us if we do not stand together.
Thank you, Metra. Call for solidarity, absolutely more needed now than ever. Wendy.
I'd say intersectionality 10 times, but that wouldn't be precise enough. The call from Madre, from colleagues in South Africa is let's work together to get behind an understanding and a definition of apartheid that includes gender in the existing definition, includes gender and race, and recognizes the settler colonial roots of apartheid systems everywhere. In that way, no one is left behind and no one is erased in an existing definition that would incorporate gender. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Intersectionality and calling for the end of apartheid. Judge Najla.
I would definitely recommend that codification is one of the key elements that we have to codify first, the gender oppression, and then monitor the enforceability.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you all. Yes, thank you so much for staying. I hope it was an engaging conversation and discussion for you also. We have also online participants who ask questions. We will reply to them in writing after the event, but to be continued, I would say. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good idea.